What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, March 13th, 2019, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Powahana Friday and whatever's going to be happening after that as well. We have a lot to talk about today. It's actually a very busy news day. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to put you on the air with your comments, questions, and opinions. Okay, so let's just get right on into it. Obviously, the big news is Venezuela. And there's an interesting little article coming out of Sputnik News where it's basically saying right now the credibility of U.S. imperial blackmail hangs on the success of the Venezuela policy. And basically, you know, they're dealing with the blackout down there. Juan Guaido is still declaring that he's the interim president, if not the de facto president. He's backed up by the United States. And basically, a journalist told Sputnik that U.S. moves, while backed up by disturbing language, are a tacit admission that the coup is going nowhere. And a big part of that, of course, is that this whole thing started when Juan Guaido assured Mike Pence that half of Venezuela's military would side with him as soon as he declared himself to be the interim president. That did not happen. About 0.1% of Venezuela's military sided with him. And I imagine probably about now even they are having second thoughts and they're back over supporting Maduro. So right now, a lot of attention is being focused on the power blackout and exactly how that came about. And we're hearing more and more confirmation now that 2 individuals have been arrested at that hydroelectric dam that provides most of the power for Venezuela. And apparently it has been determined they were engaged in sabotage, and that this may in fact provide the legal justification to indict Guaido for terrorism, because apparently these saboteurs are linked to him. And so the situation is really beginning to unravel. Now, Donald Trump is asking for $500 million to restore democracy to Venezuela, by which he means regime change. Okay, this is not going well, so let's just throw more money at the problem, and if we throw enough of the American people's money at Venezuela, Venezuela will become what we have decided it ought to be, which is a U.S. vassal state here. And so at a press conference on Monday, Mike Pompeo said, we've asked Congress to appropriate up to $500 million to restore the economy of the Venezuelan nation and help Juan Guaido. Well, this is typical United States duplicity. The reason the Venezuelan economy is a ruin is decades of economic war and more recently massive economic sanctions. So now the U.S. is going to say, we're going to help Venezuela out of the goodness of our hearts. You know, it's like they starve Venezuela with sanctions, then they send in a couple of truckloads of food and say, see, we're humanitarian here. We're sending in the aid. But what this is really going on here, again, it's all about the oil. It's about the fact that Venezuela spends the wealth of the nation on the people of the nation, and that just sets a bad example for all the other Western democracies where all of the wealth is supposed to go to the already wealthy. So they wanted to basically tear down this Bolivarian social democracy and replace it with a U.S.-controlled tyranny, as well as controlling the oil and, more importantly, what currency that oil is being sold for. So it's another U.S. intervention, and like so many of these other U.S. interventions over the last 17 years, it's already bogged down. It's already a quagmire. In fact, I think they've just set a new speed record for getting themselves into a quagmire here. So Mike Pompeo is out there saying that all constraint on action in Venezuela is lifted. Elliot Abrams is saying the option of attacking Venezuela is always on the table. Okay, Elliot, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit. Watch your head climbing into that transport plane, and we'll call Maduro and tell him you are on your way to kick his butt all by yourself. But the rest of us, we're going to just sit back because we've had enough of this war and conquest for the benefit of the banks and the defense contractors and, the ultra-rich. Enough is enough is enough. You want to attack Venezuela? Go ahead and do it yourself. All right, let's take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Sorry I called so early, but Mike, they're not going to attack Venezuela. I mean, I'm from Florida. They're not going to attack Venezuela and Cuba. There's no 40,000 Cuban troops in Venezuela. There's Cuban advisors there.
Yes.
Just like there's Russian advisors in to what they're looking out after their own interests, and so do the Chinese. But Venezuela's got its own security forces. So this whole 40,000 thing is a crock because, remember they said Russian special forces were there? Remember that? The Russian, and then they said Wagner Group, which is Russia's version of Blackwater, which is called the Wagner Group. They were over there also. Could be, maybe, small groups, but more like advisors. There's not going to be no invasion of Venezuela. Mike, the power is coming back on since yesterday.
Yeah, they're up to about 71% restored now.
Yeah. It's another failed attempt. They've lost. They've lost, Mike. There's nothing they can do except for putting more sanctions on. But the longer this goes on, there's alternative ways to go away from the sanctions, like Iran, Russia, China, Turkey.
Yeah,
right?
all these sanctions you're doing is driving the rest of the world away from the U.S. dollar. It's a bad policy. It has not been thought all the way through to the end. We've got way too many people in positions of power who are just out there just thinking, if we do this, we will win. And they're not really thinking what's the worst case scenario that could happen. When you engage in a policy, there should basically be three reports. Best case, worst case, and middle case. And the middle case is what you look at, annotated with the other two. What happens if we get the breaks? What happens if it works against us? And we have too many people who are out there just saying, well, if we catch all the breaks, if we get all the luck, then this is going to work our way. But of course, lady luck is fickle. And, again, looking at the track record of the United States over the last 17 years, it has not been a pattern of success. It's been a pattern of getting stuck in these swamps, these quagmires. It's been a pattern of horrific war crimes being committed by the United States government, and just bankrupting the nation, bankrupting the nation's people to pay for it all, and letting our nation just crumble into ruin in the process.
Hey, Mike, did you see that Twitter account, like from an opposition leader, it showed like damage on this supposed dam, like the hydroelectric, but it was actually footage from like 10 years ago, a Russian dam that there was an accident. They actually took the footage and added Venezuela to the picture.
Yeah,
they took of the damage. See, this is how that works. It's all, unless you do your own research. If they show you a picture, they expect you to believe it. Don't believe anything unless you do your own research and double check and triple check that information.
Well, one of the best things you can do, if you're not sure that a picture is really what you think it is save a local copy to your computer and then go into Google and just go into the little image tab, and you can drag and drop that image into Google search, and it'll show you all the images that look just like it, and that'll give you a good idea about what's really going on.
And they did the same thing. Remember with Ukraine? They showed all this line of tanks that wound up being from Georgia in 2006 or 8?
Yeah.
Remember that photo? Yep. They showed it actually in the Congress or the Senate because those idiots didn't even know anything. Just like Marco Rubio didn't even know German dam. The guy was named German. He didn't know the name of the... I mean, these people are morons, and they just don't know and they don't care. They go along with the party line. You know? All right, Mike, have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot, Dustin. We're going to let you go here and get back to the news here. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network, or actually they joined about 4 minutes ago here. So getting on back here to Venezuela, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has issued a stern warning against interfering in Venezuela's internal affairs and imposing more sanctions. And speaking in Beijing, Wang Yi said that the external interference and sanctions will only exacerbate the tense situation and allow the law of the jungle to once again run amok. And this comes after President Maduro said that an electric energy war declared by the United States will not succeed. So it's very intense over there. Now, a different point of view. Apparently, the former UN rapporteur to Venezuela, Alfred de Zayas, is saying that he thinks Maduro might be assassinated. And I'm in agreement. That's a very likely possibility. It would be insane for the United States to just invade Venezuela. It would become another Vietnam. And the United States is already militarily overextended all over the globe. And the American people are just running out of money to pay for it all here. So more and more people are looking at this blackout and saying that the timing was too cute, the damage too extensive. It does look like it was U.S. unconventional warfare. And Maduro is now saying that there is evidence that a U.S. cyber attack caused the blackout. And, of course, the Trump administration is saying, well, how silly. I mean, really, how could you guys even think that of us? I mean, my feelings are so hurt that you think we would ever do something like that, really. I mean, just seriously. By the way, have a free flash drive on us. China is offering to help Venezuela to get their power back online. And it was a 5-day blackout. And it was pretty ugly, and there was, shortages of fresh water. People died in the hospitals. And again, you look at whoever gave the order for this cyber attack. And again, as we reported yesterday, this was something that was being considered back during the Bush administration to bring down Venezuela, to just knock out their electric system. So we know the government was thinking about it. And in the event of a new world war, it's going to happen all over. So for those of you who are into prepping, keep that in mind. You could be without electricity for 4 to 5 days here. The fact of the matter is that Venezuela had been doing really, really good following the election of Hugo Chavez back in 1998. And Venezuela was receiving praise for its social gains from the United Nations, various international humanitarian organizations, and economists. But the corporate media and the government don't want you to look at that. Again, because it sets a bad example. People were looking at Venezuela and saying, wow, here's a government that takes the wealth of the nation and spends it on the nation's people. Why is that not making a lot of sense? And, of course, all the world's bankers and money junkies and the rest of it say, no, we can't have that. You people of the nation, you only exist to make us richer. Don't you understand that? But under Hugo Chavez, poverty in Venezuela was cut by more than a third, extreme poverty by 57%. And these declines were even steeper if measured from the depths of the opposition-led oil strike, which was designed to force Chavez out by wrecking the economy. Now, the Venezuelans understand all this. They know it. They lived it. And I think that's why, despite all the propaganda and the blackouts and Juan Guaido standing up and saying, I am the state, the people of Venezuela are siding with Maduro, because they understand what's going on. They recognize it. They've seen this all before. Now, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was out there accusing Cuba and Russia of propping up Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela. And how dare you do that? How dare you be friends with people that we've declared to be our enemies out there? And I mean, it's kind of a ridiculous situation. You've got the United States who is propping up the usurper, Juan Guaido. Again, they're still out there saying, Maduro's a dictator. Maduro's a dictator. Why won't you believe us? Maduro's a dictator. He was not a dictator. He got voted into power in an election with international observers who said it was as fair and honest, as transparent as elections ever get. So, yeah, it does look like the coup d'etat has failed. Whether the United States is going to take that next step into an outright invasion remains to be seen. And they're going to have some kind of a false flag. Oh, my goodness, Nicolas Maduro has plowed a Boeing 737 MAX 8 into the Superdome, and we just have to invade now. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Jeff in Idaho, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Slimy Bung. How are you?
I'm doing okay. What's on your mind?
Well, I mean, I'll be honest with you. The main thing that sort of, when I look inside my mind, it's filled up with, heavy-duty combat involving swords.
Oh, yeah, I remember who you are. Now, you told the control room technician you wanted to talk about the college admissions, which we're going to be getting into that later in the show. Right now, we're talking about Venezuela. Do you have something to contribute on Venezuela?
Well, I mean, I think a good idea if there's going to be any sort of combat. I mean, why not think about introducing swords?
Well, to be very honest, I know you're being facetious, but I think in the days when soldiers had to look each other in the eye while they hacked each other to bits was actually a deterrent to war, as opposed to modern war where it's all done by remote control and people start to think it's a little different from a video game.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's actually what I'm saying. I'm not being facetious. I mean, I'm anti-war, and I think the hand-to-hand combat would do a lot to basically deter war, like you said. I mean, we're on the same page here. We both love swords. We're both sword enthusiasts. I mean, I don't know why we're always fighting.
Well, the other thing that would really work to discourage war is to go back to the days when leaders who desired war led their troops into battle, like Napoleon or Alexander the Great. And apparently by the end of his life, Alexander lattes and their little control panels and their video screens, and they just, send all these other people's children off to be killed and crippled, and they just think it's wonderful fun.
You know what? I'll tell you something. I mean, I'll level with you here, sir. I have a fairly successful prank calling business where I do prank phone calls, but we call a lot of nasty people. And you're actually a good guy. You don't deserve any nasty pranks. You're a good guy. You're on the right side of all of these issues. So kudos.
Well, thank you very much for that. You actually run a business doing prank phone calls?
That's right. That's how I earn my living, sir.
Oh, okay. I'm rather curious as to who would pay you to do that sort of thing. Is it along the lines of like those Russian guys who got Elliot Abrams on the record?
No. This is all for fun. This is all just for fun. So it's all just for entertainment purposes and then nothing serious.
All right. Well, sounds, hey, in this day and age in the economy, great that you got a job and a business here. Jeff, I hate to do this. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to get on back here to what's going on with Venezuela. And John Bolton is now threatening companies who are shipping Venezuelan oil to Cuba. And again, the United States is out there saying, we're in charge. we may not be in charge of the world, but this is our hemisphere, and South America is our backyard, and you're going to do what we tell you. And so basically, he's out there threatening sanctions on insurance companies, flag carriers, and it's just pushing people away from the United States and from the U.S. dollar here. Now, interestingly, only last January, John Bolton was on Fox News with an interview, and he actually said it would be great if the United States could get their hands on that Venezuelan oil. So there it was. This is what they've been planning for quite some time. It's all about the oil. And most importantly, what currency it's sold in. That's been a major thorn in the side of U.S. foreign economic policy, is that Venezuela refuses to go along with the idea of selling their oil only for the U.S. dollar. They'll sell it for the yuan. They'll sell it for any currency that a nation wishing to buy the oil wants to pay, because they know they can take that currency, send it back to that country, and get agricultural produce or manufactured goods. The problem with accepting American currency, the dollar, around the world is there really isn't a lot left in this country people want to buy, except the real estate. That's still doing very well. But that has bubbled up, and that may burst as well. Apparently, this Saturday, there is going to be a protest in front of the White House, a hands-off Venezuela protest. And, of course, you're never going to see that one on the corporate media. So, anyway, we've been talking about how Algeria is having riots and a lot of protests. But according to this article out of Fars News, apparently this is another attempted color revolution by the United States, aided by France. And basically, they're identifying that there's the Central Operations Room in Rabat City in Morocco, and they have these intelligence officers in there who are just trying to stir up trouble for the Algerians. Okay. Over in Syria, there's a senior French officer, Colonel Francois-Regis Legriere, and he's been in charge of directing French artillery supporting Kurdish-led groups in Syria since October. He is now slamming the United States for their cowardly civilian-killing tactics and says the United States is deliberately trying to prolong the war using ISIS. They want there to be some kind of a conflict going on to justify staying in Syria, so they don't have to admit they basically lost. Which they did. Assad is still running the country. The legitimate elected government of Syria is still in charge of Syria. And it's amazing that as the U.S. stumbles in Syria and Afghanistan and is basically blockaded in so many of these other countries, that they're ready, we'll go into Venezuela, and that'll take everybody's mind off the fact that we're losing these other wars. Losing a war over here, let's start a war over there. Seems to be what they're thinking over there in the Pentagon. Now, here's a really bizarre story, and it's gratuitous Russia bashing, but it's coming out of the Washington Examiner here. Apparently, yesterday, the House passed a bill that would require the Trump administration to investigate Russian President Vladimir Putin's wealth, his ill-gotten wealth. We know he got it crookedly. And in a voice vote, lawmakers approved the Vladimir Putin Transparency Act, a bipartisan bill that accuses Putin of undermining democratic reforms in Russia. Well, this is more U.S. arrogance, okay, because it's none of the U.S. government's business what Putin is doing inside Russia. That's up for the Russian people to deal with and the Russian government. and this idea of demanding the Trump administration investigate Vladimir Putin, it is utterly ridiculous. It is overreach. So apparently this bill is one of 4 the House is considering aimed at Russia. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, over in Israel, as you know, they're coming up on their elections on April 9th, and it is turning into one of the dirtiest election campaigns in Israel's history. It's just raging back and forth. And Netanyahu, who is looking at indictments for corruption charges, is basically going to do anything to get reelected, emphasis on anything. And he's come out with some outrageous statements trying to build up his support base. And of course, one of those statements was that Israel is not a state for all of its citizens, reiterating what was encoded into that basic law, that Israel is a nation only for Jewish people. And that, of course, has fanned up tensions over the Arab-Jewish divide in the Israel election. And it hasn't been helped by the fact that Israel has basically blocked Arab parties from even being in the election at all. And even the Israeli actress who played Wonder Woman, not that it was a good movie, but she did a good job. She came on out and she said, "This is nuts. Israel should be a nation for all of its people, Arabs and Jews." And she's absolutely right. So good for her. All right, as you know, we're coming up on AIPAC's annual convention in Washington, D.C., where Israel will stand up on the stage and American politicians will basically bow before them and, with a candle in each hand and say, "Yes, Massa, yes, Massa, yes, Massa, we will do what you want, but just don't let anybody talk about it." The first rule of AIPAC Club is you don't talk about AIPAC Club. But apparently one of the speakers they have scheduled is a settler leader who's going to be discussing the future of Judea and Samaria, which is what Israel likes to call the West Bank. They're ancient biblical names. And so one can pretty much presume that what they're going to be talking about is, how do we take it over? How do we make it part of Israel again here? Now, we do have some members of Congress who are finally growing spines and saying, this really has gone on long enough. But there are still plenty of members of Congress who are willing to bow and scrape and, kiss the feet of Israel. And one of them is Juan Vargas. Now, he's a Democratic congressman from California. And first of all, he's out there tweeting that questioning support for the U.S.-Israel relationship is unacceptable. And unfortunately, he's on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House of Representatives with Ilhan Omar. But he is basically out there saying that he will never, ever, ever question the relationship, the special bond that we have between Israel and the United States. Even more interesting, though, he came on out saying that he supports the 67 borders of Israel. And he's not talking about the 1967 borders. He's talking about 67 AD, which means Israel would encompass parts of Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and parts of Egypt. That's what he's out there saying. Okay, we have a caller on the line. Lenny in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Venezuela, Mike. I want to speak in the sense that you were talking about what's going to come next. And I think that the fact that they're looking to get their diplomatic staff out, we may be looking at a naval blockade coming up, okay, to try and really just start the Venezuelan people out. And this is when I think that the Russian And the Chinese and the Iranians and the Turkish navies have to show up to prevent it from happening. Now, as far as the 40,000 troops being down in 40,000 Cuban troops being in Venezuela, I haven't read that, or it hasn't been proven to me, but I did hear Dr. Rick Wiles of True News report that there were 300 Mossad agents down in Colombia waiting for this whole thing to help this whole thing jump off. But if that does happen, I hope that 40,000 do come from Cuba. 40,000 come from Nicaragua. 40,000 come from Bolivia, wherever they need to come from to prevent this from happening. And I think they truly have to take control of the Venezuelan oil before they go after Iran, because if Iran shuts down the Straits of Hormuz, that's big trouble for the entire world.
Well, you're right about that latter part here, and that's the reason that the Obama administration authorized this extremely deep oil well drilling into these very deep oil reserves under extremely high pressure, which led to the Deepwater Horizon disaster. As far as Russia and China getting involved with a U.S. naval blockade of Venezuela, first of all, I think you're right. A naval blockade would definitely be part of it. But if you look at the layout of the Caribbean, I think it's going to be very, very tricky for Russia, China, and whoever else to get on in there. That the United States could simply establish a blockade line across the mouth of the Caribbean to prevent that from happening. It's a bad tactical situation, to be very honest.
Yeah, it is. But I hope that all the Latin American countries can see what they have in common. It was like you were saying earlier about some lawmaker asking Trump to look into the financial dealings of Vladimir Putin. What we have here is a God complex.
Yes.
Okay, we have a group of people who think that they're gods and they deserve to rule over everybody else. When all we have to do is get together and kick their ass, all we have to do is get together and kick the crap out of them, and it's over. But I hope those Latin American countries do see what they have more in common than apart. But Chavez was 100% right when he said Colombia was the Israel of the Latin America. He was 100% right about that. But, they're all infiltrated down there. And what your friend Layla said yesterday, I was down in Costa Rica not too long ago on the southern coast. There were all kind of Israeli businesses down there. And there's a contention with the native people there that's already starting to happen. So, I think we're going to keep an eye on that. But that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And we're going to let you go here. And I don't want to, have been dedicating years of my life to not have major powers just have at each other. Naval blockade of Venezuela, yes. I think, though, that Russia and China would not try and challenge that. I think Russia is going to stick with the policy that worked in Syria. Lure the United States into a war of attrition and just wear them down. And the issue with Venezuela, of course, is it only has ocean on one side. A naval blockade cannot completely cut it off the way they could do with, like, Cuba. And so Venezuela would probably be able to conduct commerce across some of the other borders with countries that remain friendly with it. So we'll see what's going to happen. But at this point, the attempt at a coup has failed. It didn't even get as far as the last one, which actually did force Hugo Chavez from power for a grand total of 2 days. And Elliot Abrams was involved in that one as well, which kind of makes you wonder why he got the job the second time with a record of failure like that. Alrighty, getting on back to what's going on over at Israel. The U.S. State Department is now changing its official description of the Golan Heights from Israeli occupied to Israeli controlled. And the change first appeared in an annual global human rights report released Wednesday. So they're telegraphing that, yes, the U.S. government is going to say, we, the United States of America, Imperial us, have decided that Golan belongs to Israel. And they're getting ready to do that. So the State Department is dropping all reference to the Golan Heights as being occupied or under occupation. So that's where we're going on this one. And once again, there has been a disturbance at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This one was on video. It went viral. Dozens of Israeli soldiers stormed the Al-Aqsa compound, assaulting worshipers, including women, and a number of religious figures. So that is escalating as well. Okay. And apparently Netanyahu is doubling down on his statement about how Israel is not a state for all of its citizens, but only for the Jewish people, and trying to justify the expulsion of Arab parties from the election by simply saying Arab voters will shake the security of the state. And a big part of that, of course, is that there is a demographic issue there with the number of Arabs who live inside Israel. We're not talking about Gaza or the West Bank. There are a large number of Arabs who are citizens of Israel, and Israel does not want them there. Turkey is urging the world to react against Israeli aggressions on the sacred places of Islam. And Israel, of course, is doing this deliberately because they're trying to provoke a response that could be used to justify more aggressions against Palestine, more aggressions against Gaza, the West Bank. Now, the other day we had a story about how support for Israel by Americans is at a 10-year low. And it turned out that Gallup's poll, even while it said support is low, they were still trying to fudge the numbers. And IRMEP basically went back and looked at the raw data, and their numbers are right now only 22.2% in the United States sympathize more with Israelis. That's less than 1/4. That's less than 1 out of every 4. And now you know why Israel is in an absolute panic. They have survived since the founding of Israel on this public relations campaign about how they're always the victims and everything that they do is in response to a threat. And poor, poor Israel, feel sorry for them, send money, send weapons, never question. And it's all falling apart. All lies do have a shelf life. Some lies are propped up for a very, very, very long time, but all lies eventually fall. Pew study came out earlier this month saying that only 12% of Americans think Israel is a top foreign policy partner. The poll shows that 37% of Americans believe Great Britain is the most valuable partner, and after that, China, followed by Canada. So there you have it. Americans don't see Israel as really a helpful partner. And it isn't, because it's all one way. Israel takes and takes and takes and takes some more, and then comes back and says, yes, you were nice to me last week, but this is this week. What are you going to give me? And Americans are tired of it, especially as we head into a recession. Americans are saying, why are we having to suffer to take care of a country that really isn't benefiting us? I mean, certainly it's a benefit to members of Congress. They're making out like bandits. Anyway, more and more people are starting to stand up in opposition to all of these bills that are attempting to ban criticism of Israel, and they're all making exactly the same point. This is an infringement on the First Amendment. And the latest conflict on this is down in Florida, surrounding House Bill 741, which would specify the term religion includes anti-Semitism for the purposes of the hate crime statute, among other things. And the bill basically wants to crack down on anti-Semitism, and critics are saying it's too narrow because it fails to address other forms of xenophobia and hate crimes, and it violates the First Amendment by criminalizing legitimate criticisms of the state of Israel. And that's always been what this is about. We're not talking about the Jewish religion. We're not talking about Jewish people. We're not talking about Jewish food. We're talking about the behavior. We're talking about the actions of individuals within the government of Israel. And that is a legitimate area of commentary protected by that First Amendment. And I don't know about you. I am appalled that any American politician would even consider putting their name on a bill that violates the First Amendment of the United States of America to serve a foreign master. And I hope that voters in these states are going to be thinking about this the next time elections come around in 2020. Because no government can serve two masters. All righty. Story coming on out of the nationalinterest.org. Apparently there are some 50 plus retired generals and diplomats who are urging the United States to rejoin the Iran nuclear deal. And the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the P5+1 deal, put limitations on Iran's nuclear program that provided assurances it would not be used to develop weapons. And it worked. And by the way, Iran is still complying with that agreement, and so are the other nations that signed it. It's only the United States that pulled on out. And they never kept their promises under the agreement anyway. Instead of relaxing sanctions and releasing Iranian funds, they threw more sanctions on there and said, we want a new deal. And this time you have to include your long-range ballistic missiles. And there will be no negotiation. So, all righty, we're going to take another break here for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go to the phones here to Sebastian in Sweden. Aloha, Sebastian. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello, Mike. I just wanted to tell you I watched that 4-part series about the Israeli lobby today, and it was really good. I think everyone should watch it. It's really informative. I'd like to ask you a question about the congresswomen. Aren't there 4 that said something about the Israeli lobby? It's Oman, and it's Chelsea Gabbard, and 2 others, aren't they?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember their names, but definitely Ilhan Omar and Tulsi Gabbard are in the headlines right now.
Yeah, and then before them there was Cynthia McKinley and Traficant.
Yes. And both Cynthia McKinney and Traficant felt the wrath of AIPAC, and I have absolutely no doubt that AIPAC is going to be gunning for Tulsi Gabbard and Ilhan Omar. How effective they're going to be, we're not sure. I mean, their influence is on the wane, and I think as these poll numbers indicate, politicians are going to start looking at those poll numbers and say, being a friend of Israel is no longer the vote getter it used to be. In fact, the last couple of election cycles, we've seen candidates actually set up 2 different campaign websites. One is specifically aimed at the Jewish vote and Jewish fundraising, and then there'll be another one that is aimed at regular Americans. And the mailings are going to be targeted, and so most Americans don't know about the other website. But they're starting to de-emphasize their support for Israel to ordinary American voters.
Isn't it true? They're all Democrats, right? Traficant and Cynthia McKinley, I think they were Democrats as well.
You may be correct on that, yes.
So that means that no Republican has ever said anything about Israel or the lobby, the AIPAC.
Well, nobody comes to mind right now, but I'm not willing to simply declare that it's never happened. It's just I'm not aware of it.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you, Mike. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Okay, the Senate is voting today on ending the U.S. role in the Yemen war. And basically, the bill would declare the war illegal under the War Powers Act. And so it's SJ Resolution 7. It's a clean version of the challenge without any amendments yet attached to it. And I think it'd be a good thing if Congress were to take back their constitutional authority to decide when and where this country goes to war. Because going all the way back to Bush, they simply abandoned that responsibility and said, wherever the president wants to go, yeah, it's okay. Apparently, there's been another problem where children as young as 8 have been raped in a besieged city in war-hit Yemen by Saudi-backed militiamen. This is coming from Amnesty International. Okay, we have to take a break here for station identification, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're going to go to the phones to speak to Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Your last caller asked you a question about whether Republicans have ever done anything about AIPAC or Israel or Ron Paul.
Oh, of course. Yes, absolutely. I don't know why that,
Well, because it's so obvious.
Yes.
And his son ran.
Senior moment on my part here. I'm an old guy. Have to cut me some slack. Okay.
Mike, you don't need any slack. You're a lot sharper than most people out there. You just kind of get, whoa, what did this guy just say? And like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, Ron.
No, you're absolutely right. Ron Paul's been very critical of AIPAC and critical of Israel. And
neocons.
Say again?
Neocons?
Yes.
Yeah, well, yeah. I was years ago, I was a really big fan of anything Ron Paul. When I started getting into your website, anything Ron Paul on YouTube, I'd watch. Because everything he said made so much sense, and he explained what was really wrong.
Yes,
with the country, and basically it's such a simple thing. It's that little booklet called the Constitution.
Yes,
and it's been trampled on, and just used as toilet paper. I think someone referred to George W. Bush saying something like that, or it's a blah 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 piece of paper or something, or the Bill of Rights and all.
Blankety blank piece of paper. Yeah. Well,
like holy.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, I'm a strict constitutionalist, and I only recognize the authority of a government that is fully in compliance with that Constitution, which unfortunately, sadly, we do not have now.
Mike, you're not the only country out there like that. Canada, I mean, we have a bunch of laws that go directly against the Canadian Constitution, and one of them is banking too.
Yes.
It's the same thing. It's everywhere. Well, specifically, probably more in the West. I mean, look at Marianne. What was her name? Marine Le Pen.
Marine Le Pen. Yes.
She recognized what happened with France, because just before what Pierre Elliott Trudeau did with Canada, which was basically through the all government deficits into private banking. The same thing happened to France. They did the same thing for that stupid G7 thing, which was basically a bank takeover.
Yes.
Of the so it's just it all comes back to the money.
That's what it's always about. We've got all these money junkies that are running around. They're basically carving up the world and trying to get the biggest chunk to put in their pockets.
Yeah, and look what's happened. I mean, wealth inequality is, I think the United States is almost number one now.
It's certainly close.
For wealth inequality.
It is certainly close, and it's about to get a lot worse, with Trump's new budget. We're not a capitalist nation anymore. We've slid into economic fascism. where the wealth, by design, is taken out of the hands of the people whose labor creates that wealth, and it's delivered into the pockets of the bankers and the financial players.
And that's one of the reasons why Trump didn't want Powell raising the interest rates. Cheap cash. You
Yes.
can just go out there and do almost anything stupid if you have just a little inclination of what's going on, and friends in certain places. Anyone can make a bunch of money. All it takes is a little bit of know-how and the people in the right places, and you're there.
Yes.
You know, and who suffers? Because, I mean, that cash comes from someplace else. It's siphoned off
Yes.
of something else like pensions, right?
Yep.
Government pensions and private pensions have taken a beating in the United States.
Well, look what the
Everyone
Clinton
gets
administration did to the Social Security Trust Fund. I mean, they just plundered that.
Mike, I even have to wonder if these deficits aren't really just padded lies, because, you know, Social Security, there's nothing there. It's actually being financed year to year. It wouldn't surprise me. They lie about everything else. Who's to say they're going to lie about that too?
Yeah, that's unfortunately where we are right now. We can't trust any of these things. I mean, it was great that we had that story, I think it was yesterday, where the Fed came on out and actually admitted that, yeah, there are massive numbers of Americans who do not have jobs right now. And just puts the lie to this claim that, you know, oh, we're almost, you know, fully employed here, and that's why we can allow illegal immigrants or legal immigrants to come on in.
Yeah.
It really is.
Well, I mean,
it's like living in a real-life version of the Matrix. Everything that you see on these little screens, you know, is just, you know, it's a fiction.
make believe. Yes, that's exactly it. Mike, I don't use a cell phone. I won't use a cell phone. I don't buy the newspaper. I don't watch the news. I don't read newspapers. You know, a lot of the information I get from your site, and all the other sites that link to your site. I go there, and you know, you just keep looking around. It's all
Yes.
over the world. The truth is out there.
Yes.
And they're trying to trample it down so hard you can see it. And as soon as you can see just a little bit of that light, the room's lit up. Now you can see it all. You see
Yes.
it all on full display. These people are terrified because they're losing.
Yes.
We have to keep going. Mike, thank you very much for your time.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. And yeah, we're going to keep on going. And no, I don't read newspapers. Well, I'll look at the comics. I'll admit that. You know, if I'm in a waiting room somewhere and there's comics, I'll look at those. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And yeah, you can almost smell the panic coming on out of the establishment. And that's where we're getting all this behavior by Google and Twitter and Facebook and all the rest of them to just try and shut down anything that challenges the narrative coming from government and corporations. And we look at that and we say, well, it's censorship and it's dictatorship, and yes, it is. But there's an upside to it because they're behaving in a manner that people are noticing. And if you go over to the whatreallyhappened.com online store, we have a coffee mug that we have been selling for, I think, close to 20 years now that says the fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force them to act like one where everybody can see it. And that's where we are right now. Okay, we're going to go back to the phones here to Raleigh in Minnesota. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I'm giving you a call about something that Donald Trump said over the weekend in Florida in a closed conference with his Republican donors. He said if I ran an Israeli election, I would win 98% of the vote. He didn't, mention what he would run as, like prime minister, president, or local dog catcher, though. But it's ridiculous that Donald Trump, he makes these outrageous claims over and over again.
I agree.
He's campaigning.
I agree. That was an absolutely asinine statement for him to make.
I don't know if he has some sort of cognitive decline. It's not for me to speculate. I'm not a psychiatrist, but in a time where the Democrats and Republicans are absolutely tearing each other apart and only care about one thing, and it's money. And these big business Zionists, want to pander and get funded by them. I mean, left and right, both sides of the aisle, they're just screaming mad Zionists, no matter what the political issue is of the day. That is the one thing that they all fall back on. They are shock troops to the New World Order.
It's
Donald Trump. Donald Trump went on to go on to say, throwing Democrats under the bridge, basically saying that they hate the Jews. I don't understand how a Jew could ever vote for a Democrat. That was the follow-up to that original statement.
I think Trump is heading in a dangerous direction. If you remember a little while ago, I was saying the American people are waking up to Israel's influence over our government, and it's going to start working against candidates. It could work against Trump in 2020 if he doesn't pull back from all of this. Let's do everything for Israel. His job is to take care of this country. He already ran for president in the United States, and he won in 2016. He's supposed to be doing the job right now, not sitting there speculating about, well, if I were to run in the Israeli elections. That's a lousy Donald Trump impression. I'll have to work on that. If I were to run in the Israeli elections, I would win 98% of the vote. It's a complete, total fantasy. I mean, come on.
You're absolutely correct. And then he goes on to talk to among his donors of all the nice stuff that he's done for Israel, including moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Many millennials nowadays and the people that they should be pandering to, the young people, they're very worried and they're very more conscious now than ever about what's going on in money and politics. And, it's up for that corporate class, those good old white boys, that they should really put themselves out to reach out to young people, to be quite honest with you, instead of, just ignoring us, because we're really not that mad about Omar making a tweet saying it's all about the Benjamins to AIPAC with just, music notes. She didn't even put like Star of David notes on there or anything. It's just music notes, that she tweeted out. And it's just mild criticism to AIPAC, which is an atrocious organization that's not necessarily representing all Jews. Matter of fact, many Jews up at north that I know about personally, they detest AIPAC. And these guys, AIPAC, they act more like a mafia than they do a religious group.
Well, I think that could be said for many political organizations here. But again, going back to that four-part documentary about the Israel lobby, they're very well organized. They're ubiquitous across our landscape. And as long as people are caught up in these petty rivalries and all of this transgender nonsense and LGBTQ stuff, they're not paying attention to the theft of their country. And maybe that's the real agenda behind all of this nonsense, is to prevent the American people from coming together to unite in opposition to Israel's influence over our government.
Yep, you're absolutely correct. If you're wondering deeply if you're a man or a woman, it's needless to say that you might not be an expert of what's going on with foreign policy. Thank you so very much, Mike, for what you do. I'm going to get off the air.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Don in the Philippines. Aloha, Don. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Yes, it's interesting. Even the polls now are showing that Americans are waking up to the whole Israel thing, and I think a lot of them are like me. All my life I've wondered, what is this thing with Israel? I mean, I did not grow up around a lot of Jews. The Jewish people I met in America, basically, I had no problem with them. They're intelligent, they're hardworking people, and so forth.
Yep.
But I always wondered, what is this deal with Israel? And they would say, well, it's our strongest ally. Well, yeah, I'm going to be your ally if you give me billions of dollars every year. I'll be your best friend for sure. Just give me $1 billion and I'll be your ally. But what good does it do America to fund all this money to Israel? None, no good whatsoever. And if you look into it, there's a lot of things that are explained. Like, for example, why did we go to war in Iraq? Really, I mean, what happened 9/11? And you can, I mean, I don't know how far you want to go on your show with all this stuff, but there's some explanations that 9/11 was basically one big Mossad operation.
Well, the Mossad certainly helped, but there's evidence that the Bush administration was in on it as well. I think they teamed up together, and I think it was one of the biggest foreign policy mistakes ever made by the U.S. government, because Israel can now blackmail the U.S. government with 9/11 and say, "Look, give us what we want, or we'll go public on who really did 9/11, and it's going to hurt you a lot worse than it would hurt us."
I think you're right that Israel wants to tear apart America, and when Trump is part of it too. When Trump goes to Springfield, Missouri, and gives a speech, he doesn't brag about his Jewish grandchildren or his Jewish son-in-law, who's basically, I guess, his main advisor. Is what even Christie said, that his main advisor is Jared Kushner. Well, what qualifies this guy to be an advisor? His dad, he had a lot of money, or I mean, what's the deal? He's just a kid.
Yep.
Nobody knows who he is. His daughter is one of his advisors, and she's a fashion designer. Well, that's great. I mean, so Trump basically, I don't think even if he does run, I think one thing that's going to hurt in the next election is probably going to be a recession and a stock market crash right around the time. It'll be really getting frothy about the time that he's running next time. If he does run, I think he either will not run or he'll get beat because people are seeing through his lies. He never did build the wall. He had a Republican Congress for a long time. You mean to tell me he could not call them in and say, "Hey, we're going to get funding"? I mean, he should have had the wall built by now. He didn't build the wall, and basically, he does not do anything he says. So he deserves to be.
I think he's a one-term president. I supported him in 2016, but he's a one-term president. He dropped the ball on vaccine safety. He dropped the ball on election integrity. He's still thrashing around with the border wall. And he's done some things that are really good. But on the issues that he really ran on, that people voted him for, getting out of these foreign entanglements, we're not out of those foreign entanglements. We're getting deeper in. And you're right, the economy is going to take a downturn before the 2020 elections. The Democrats are going to blame Trump for it, and Trump is going to go down in flames. And part of the problem is he's turned his back on his own base that supported him in 2016, including the independent media. He's not doing anything to counter the censorship of conservatives on corporate social media. And with
he doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah, he's doomed. I'm sorry.
He doesn't know what he's doing, and his slogan already, he's announced his slogan for the next time is "Keep America Great Again." So when the stock market crashes, that slogan is not going to make any sense anymore. I'll let you go, Mike. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, two things. One, just want to let everybody know, we can beat these censors with YouTube, with Facebook, with Twitter. What I do is I'm looking for stuff. I look for stuff that I subscribe to, and it'll come up. If it doesn't, I know where to look for it and it's there. Okay, that's including your show now on YouTube. And the other thing, and it's not only YouTube. You can basically pass along information on Facebook. It's the only reason I stay on Facebook. The same thing in Twitter. It's easy to pass along information, and that's what people got to start using these things for. Whatever they come up with and say they want you to watch it, I don't bother because I know it probably comes from mainstream like the crap news network, fake news network, and I don't bother. The other thing about the Zionist lobby,
yes,
I think people are getting smart to it, and again, you find out the truth online that you can't get on the mainstream media. Like, I think Glenn Beck actually got something on YouTube. I watched watching a little, then I got bored and turned it off. talking about how horrible Ilhan Omar is, this and that, and how the Muslim Brotherhood influences the U.S. government. But of course, he didn't say anything about how the Israeli lobby, how AIPAC influences the American government either. So, you know, he just gives you one side of the story, which is pretty much what the mainstream media does.
That is, and as far as Israel's influence, it's not just in government. We're talking about it is the third rail. It's also in the corporate media. And in any event, Mark, I'm going to have to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And apparently over in India, their Air Force is now on high alert following two Pakistani jets flying near the border. And they were apparently detected flying 10 kilometers from the line of control near the Poonch sector of Jammu and Kashmir. And the jets were accelerated to supersonic speed and then flew away, but they didn't actually cross the border. All right, here's a very troubling article. It's coming out of Blacklisted News here. And it's talking about how the United States government, as if they weren't already swamped in the Middle East and now Central America, they're now eyeing to go into sub-Saharan Africa. And we know there's a military command that they formed called AFRICOM, which sounds alarmingly like the Africa Corps. And we get Rommel out there and we just give them what for. Yeah. But apparently the United States wants to basically exert more influence over sub-Saharan Africa. They're engaged in what they are calling an anti-terror campaign in Niger, Somalia, and apparently more countries than most Americans realize. And remember back when those 4 American Special Forces were killed in Niger last year, actually 2017, even members of Congress were surprised. They didn't even know we were there. So here's my point. The United States military is overextended all over the globe. And yes, the U.S. government can suck more money out of the American people and buy more weapons, but they're running out of bodies. They're running out of people to put in those uniforms. Now, there was an attempted program to go to these illegal immigrants and say that if you will serve in the U.S. military for X number of years, when you get out, you get your green card. And they actually tried that for a while, and then they canceled the program because the illegal immigrants are not committed fighters. They don't have an emotional connection to the United States of America. So at some point, I don't know how they've held off doing it for this long, but at some point there's going to be a draft. Or the United States is basically going down the same road that Nazi Germany did toward the end of World War II, which is less reliance on ground troops and more reliance on the high-tech whiz-bang, which according to the Rand Corporation is now the Achilles heel of the U.S. military capability against places like Russia and China. Over in the Philippines, Philippine troops backed by airstrikes and artillery fire killed several militants aligned with the Islamic State group in a new offensive in the marshy heartland of the country's south. So we literally are a world at war. It just seems that conflict is raging everywhere. Here's an article talking about the Trump administration and their approach to North Korea. It's from the nationalinterest.org. And basically saying that the Trump's policy, it isn't engagement. It's a demand for Kim Jong-un's total surrender. And they're basically echoing what I had said before, that the U.S. approach to North Korea is, you give us everything we want now, and then we'll do something nice for you. and it's not going to work. And it's failure built in. But it shows the belligerence and the ego that seems to permeate the entire U.S. federal government. You know, that they can just go into other countries and say, you will obey us. You will give us what we want. We're the United States of America. We're exceptional. We're indispensable. You can't live without us and the U.S. dollar. And by golly, you're just going to give us what we want. And it really is a lousy way to run a foreign policy, unless you're planning on being the Fourth Reich. So, and it's doomed to fail because other nations don't like to be told what to do. They want to come to an agreement. They want engagement. They want negotiation. They want to say, okay, if you do this, then we will do that. And then you do this, and we will do that. And then you do this some more, and we will do that some more. That's what North Korea was offering. Step-by-step denuclearization in exchange for step-by-step relaxing of the sanctions. And the Trump administration said, no. Total denuclearization, then we'll talk sanctions. Bad way to go. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And over at UNS.com, they have a report on tracking China's naval power, which is growing by leaps and bounds. Now, Chinese military procurement is $70 billion. It's about half the rate of America's military procurement, $155 billion. However, when you adjust that for purchasing power parity, it should be about equal. Now, that phrase, purchasing power parity, is a polite way of saying that China gets a lot more for what it spends for weapons development than the United States. And the concern is that China may be ahead, deploying railguns, electromagnetic catapults, and hypersonic weapons. Well, we know they're ahead on the hypersonic weapons. We know that the electromagnetic catapults the United States has developed for the Gerald Ford are still, shall we put it politely, problematic. So they're kicking into high gear. Meanwhile, the Pentagon has announced they're going to spend $2.6 billion on developing hypersonic weaponry, which, given the efficiency of the Pentagon, means they're going to come up with a rocket. And again, Trump's 2020 budget is pouring more money on the military. $750 billion with a B to make all this stuff that kills people. I think the Pentagon budget ought to be cut until they figure out where all those missing trillions went. Remember back on September 10th, 2001? Donald Rumsfeld got up there at the Pentagon and said, yeah, we've misplaced $3 trillion. We have no idea where it went. Should have been the military financial scandal of the year. But of course, 24 hours later, 9/11 happened, and the media scurried on off to watch the collapsing World Trade Center. And that was the end of the story. But a lot of money has just gone into the Pentagon, never to be seen again, with nothing produced for it. And there is a hideous amount of waste. That's sort of almost viewed as one of the perks of the job. You get to waste a lot of money here. And I think a good example of that is this story that's coming out of Sputnik News on how the Pentagon spent $4.6 million on crab and lobster in just 1 month. $4.6 million. Can't they go to Wendy's like the rest of us? Right now, Israel is the 8th largest arms exporter in the world, according to the annual arms transfer report released Monday by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Which gets back to the question, if Israel is making enough weapons where they can sell to other countries, then why is the U.S. taxpayer paying to send more weapons to Israel? It doesn't seem that they need it. And don't forget, they've got nuclear weapons. Israel has nothing to fear from an outside invader. Anybody tries to invade Israel, whether it's Iran or Iraq or Syria or whatever, they've got the nuclear deterrent. That's the whole reason to have a nuclear deterrent. Israel uses the weapons to go and harm other people's countries here. Remember the USS Zumwalt? This is the stealth destroyer, 16,000-ton displacement, guided missile destroyer. It has apparently departed its home port in San Diego for its first operational period at sea. And the Navy is saying it demonstrates the service's commitment to advancing the lethality of stealth warships through cutting-edge technologies and combat systems, weapons, and the engineering plant. Well, I certainly hope that they've gotten all the problems out of it, but I'm not sure. Getting on back to the fact that our military is stretched very thin, some of these weapon systems may be put into service without being fully ready. And I think a good example of that is the F-35. The final software isn't ready for it. The software for the onboard cannon isn't ready. There's still all kinds of bugs in its visualization and targeting systems. It's networking, but they're already deploying them. It's got to make the pilots very, very nervous. And maybe that's one of the reasons, the real reasons, that U.S. Secretary of the Air Force Heather Wilson has announced she is going to resign in May and go back to academia. So maybe she knows something about the Air Force's real readiness for combat here. All right, let's turn to the domestic politics here. And Paul Manafort received his second sentence today at court today, and apparently he's going to face a total of 81 months behind bars. The big question is, will Trump pardon him or commute the sentence, which Trump has the authority to do so. So we'll see what's going to happen there. The real bombshell, though, is Lisa Page's testimony has now been made public. And one of the things that is in there is that she testified that the Obama Department of Justice ordered the FBI not to charge Hillary Clinton for mishandling classified information on her private email server. So this goes all the way up to Obama himself, because I don't think just people in the Department of Justice took it on themselves to say, well, tell the FBI we're not going to prosecute, so they shouldn't prosecute. But that's the big bombshell that came on out from Lisa Page's testimony. It was a huge, huge cover-up, and it went all the way up to the top. And there's a lot of other stuff in the Lisa Page testimony. Apparently, several contradictions in the timeline of that Christopher Steele dossier. So people are still going through it, and there is more to be released. Now, up in New York, former NYPD Commissioner Bernard Kerik is saying that Americans will never have faith in the U.S. government until the FBI's handling of the Hillary Clinton email probe is investigated for obstruction of justice. Of course it was obstruction of justice. That's exactly what it was. And I still have a question about that email server and all that classified information that was on it. And it goes back to the Chinagate scandal, where Bill Clinton, as he was getting ready to run for a second term in office, used his authority as president to authorize the sale to China of highly sensitive technology over the objections of the intelligence agencies and the Department of Defense. And at the same time he did that, Chinese money poured into his re-election campaign war chest, using Chinese American citizens to make it all look legal. But it really wasn't. Some of that money actually came from Chinese intelligence agencies. And there was a big stink. It was called Chinagate. There was supposed to be an investigation, but oh, gosh darn it, the White House email server broke down, and we just forgot to make backup takes for the last couple of years here. But there should be an investigation. And I think the American people have already lost confidence in the government. We all watched this whole circus unfold. We saw all that smoke that was around that scandal. We knew there had to be a fire somewhere. And we all watched James Comey get up there on TV and literally go down the laundry list of Title 18 felony violations committed by Hillary Clinton. And then said at the end, well, she didn't mean to do wrong. There was no intent. Even though Title 18 does not require intent. Now, as you know, the Robert Mueller report is going to be released any day now. They haven't specified, but it's pretty much due out. And it's looking like this may be an epic disaster for the Democrats. Because if there is nothing in there, which is what we're hearing from insiders, polls are showing that the public is basically going to view the Democrats, who are pushing this whole Russia collusion situation and get Trump, they're going to pay a price for it. And the Democrats are very, very nervous because already Representative Adam Schiff is out there saying that if FBI Special Counsel Robert Mueller found no collusion involving Trump in the 2016 election, that Congress would subpoena all of his evidence and they would look at it. They're going to keep this thing going. They're not going to let this Russiagate drop. They're not going to sit there with egg on their face and saying, whoops, we were wrong, no collusion. So they're really out there. And what's really interesting is that while he was doing that interview, he came on out and he said, responding to this debate over impeachment, which Pelosi has kicked off. He came on out and said, what would be necessary to make an impeachment a bipartisan process would have to be extraordinarily clear and compelling. I think the speaker is absolutely right. In its absence, impeachment becomes a partisan exercise doomed to failure, which sounds to me like Schiff just admitted the whole Russiagate thing, that there is no there, that it's a big nothing burger on a gluten-free bun. Now, a lot of the hardline Democrats are taking issue with Nancy Pelosi backing off on the impeachment issue. But Pelosi, as much as I do not like her, in this case, you know, she's doing the smart thing. Because they don't have anything to impeach with. And they're not going to get the Senate to remove Trump from office, which will make it look like a Democratic failure. So, all right. And we're still seeing this firestorm between Representative Ilhan Omar and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi regarding the tweets about the influence of Jewish campaign contributions on American foreign policy. And they're saying, was it a trope or was it the truth? And it is the truth, and I think this is probably going to carry on through the AIPAC convention, which is coming on up. And I have to say, much to my disappointment, Larry Klayman has gone on the warpath against Ilhan Omar and is out there trying to say there may be some kind of criminal allegations against her. And so I'm a little disappointed. I've lost a lot of respect for Larry Klayman to just come on out and attack her like this. Over at Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign, the spokeswoman apologized Tuesday after questioning whether the American Jewish community has a dual allegiance to the state of Israel, which of course is one of the comments condemned as anti-Semitic How dare you think that somebody with a ancestor from Israel, how dare you think that they're not loyal to this country? Again, it is a legitimate, valid question. And all of these screaming about anti-Semitism is a way of not having to answer the question. Remember back on Amy Goodman's Democracy Now!, they had that former member of the Knesset who basically admitted anti-Semitism is a trick. It's what Israel supporters scream at people to silence them, to shut them down, without having to address the issues being raised. Okay. Oh boy. Okay. This is just now coming on, and apparently multiple explosions have rocked a Venezuela oil refinery. All right. This. Okay. Multiple explosions from an unknown origin rocked the Petro San Felix oil refinery near San Diego de Cabrutica around 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The refinery is now on fire. Oh man, that's just getting really, really ugly. All right, getting on back to our domestic politics here. Ocasio-Cortez basically got into this contentious hearing in Washington, D.C. with Wells Fargo CEO Tim Sloan. And Alexandria was accusing Wells Fargo of being involved in financing the caging of children, and went on to say that Wells Fargo should bear financial liability for everything from oil spills to climate change. And I think this is kind of reinforcing a lot of people's opinion that she is a manufactured candidate, that she was just picked by this group of power players to be their front person, their puppet, if you will. And she literally auditioned for the job, according to some reports. Okay, now Georgia Democrat Stacey Abrams may skip a Senate run in 2020 and hop into the Democratic race for the White House. So Abrams tweeted that 2020 is definitely on the table. It is a huge, huge crowd of potential Democratic candidates, and Joe Biden is still at the top of the polls. I remember not too long ago seeing a poll of potential 2020 Democratic candidates, and Hillary Clinton was on the poll. She was down at the bottom. But I've noticed lately that the polls they're putting on out there, Hillary isn't on there at all. Now, maybe it just means that she didn't get enough response, people responding to her to get on the poll. Or it may simply be that Hillary's campaign is saying, don't mention Hillary yet, we haven't made a decision. But after that flip-flop she did last week, my instincts are telling me she's going to try and get back on in. And she's not going to have the support from the Democrats that she'd like, but she's going to have the support of all those illegal immigrants and all those liberal snowflakes. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And more than a few people, including callers to this show, have commented that we seem to be seeing our entire country ripping itself apart. And the rhetoric is certainly escalating, and it's almost like everybody's so busy fighting each other that nobody's really keeping an eye on the country itself anymore. And apparently, former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld was on MSNBC's Hardball yesterday, and apparently he is also considering challenging Trump for the Republican nomination in 2020, and compared Trump to Nero and Caligula, which is a little out there. Trump has got his failings, but until he gets his horse installed as a senator, I think we have to pull back from that a little bit. Okay, we have a caller on the line. Mo in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thank you for taking my call. I exactly what I was going to talk about. I think it is a pretty good comparison with Caligula and the way the Praetorian Guard was paid off by the different rulers. Just one little read something real quick here. It says by the time of the 2nd century, the Guard had become an ill-disciplined liability. In 193 CE, they murdered Pertinax. He, after all, had offered them a paltry 12,000 sesterces each on his ascension, and then gave their allegiance to anyone who could pay them enough, the winner being Julianus, offered to pay the enormous sum of 25,000 sesterces to every Guard member, the equivalent of 5 years' pay, and when he was made emperor, actually upped the reward to 30,000 per man. Well, it goes on and on, and I don't see any difference between this and Trump with his big military budget. It's all he's doing. I mean, maybe history doesn't, repeat itself or rhyme, but this is like they say it doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. To me, this just looks like it's repeating itself.
Well, I think it's a poor analogy, because when you're talking about the Praetorian Guard, the closest modern equivalent would, of course, be the Secret Service Presidential Detail, plus his private security. The money he's pouring on the Pentagon, the equivalent in ancient Rome would, of course, be money being poured on the legions. And again, I'm seeing a disturbing trend of people trying to imply that Trump is deteriorating mentally, and this looks to be the run-up to try and get him out of office with the 25th Amendment. I don't agree with Trump. I'm not seeing that, he's mentally ill. I think he's a weak leader. I think he's reckless. I think he's very lazy in that he doesn't read the documentation that's being given to him. But those are character flaws. They're not diagnoses of mental illness.
Well, I'm like you, Mike. I had a lot of hope in Trump. After campaigning for Ron Paul for 2 elections, and you just grasping anything but Hillary, like you. I agree with you so much about everything. But I think that, he's just...
Mo, I'm going to have to let you go. We got to do a station identification, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And before we go to the phones here, a little bit of an update on what we were talking about. It turns out the fire at that refinery in Venezuela was a storage tank. The refinery itself is fine. The fire has been put on out, and the Venezuelan government is saying the tank got struck by lightning. Apparently this actually started on Sunday, and it's taken them this long to get the fire out. So apparently nothing nefarious about this one. Okay, let's go to the phones here to James in South Carolina. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I wanted to ask you what you thought about the Libertarians. You were just talking about William Weld. Says he's going to run against Trump. Isn't he about 80?
I don't know his age here. As for what I think about the Libertarians, there's much to like about them. If I were a person to join a political party, which I sort of outgrew years ago, it would probably be the Libertarian Party.
Well, they say when Gary Johnson ran last time, William Weld was his vice presidential candidate.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed to me, maybe I'm wrong, you can correct me, but it seemed to me that the Libertarians have been co-opted. I voted for the Libertarian. I voted for Gerald Ford, and then it was a Libertarian all the way to Donald Trump. And I felt that Gary Johnson, some way or another, had hijacked, or people around him had hijacked the Libertarians. If I remember right, he said that he was going to accept money from the federal government if they got 5%. And that's not what a Libertarian does. That's not principled.
Well, I think he was being practical there because, again, you need money to win elections, and if you're a political party and you're entitled to that federal money. I don't think that necessarily means they were co-opted, but I have to be very honest here. I haven't been paying attention to the Libertarians lately, so I really do not know. anytime a movement starts gathering momentum and popularity, there are forces that seek to co-opt it. We saw that happen with the Occupy Wall Street. We're seeing it happen with the Yellow Vests, where there'll be a genuine grassroots movement to deal with what's going on in the world, and there'll be infiltrators who will go on in and try and steer it around. And again, go on back to that 4-part Al Jazeera documentary on the Israel lobby, and you will see Israel is a master at that. They will infiltrate pro-Palestinian groups in order to disrupt them. They're hardly the only one. Read the history of COINTELPRO. All during the 60s, the FBI was using campus informants, and by the way, if you're in college, they're still there. You know, they would infiltrate like the anti-war groups or the early feminists or Native American movements in order to disrupt them, to cause problems.
Well, I just wondered what you thought. The libertarians seem like to me are the best option. I just really believe that's the best thing that we can do, but I was very disappointed in their performance.
Well, I don't know. I was trying to basically get the anarchists together, you know, but nobody would show up to the conventions.
Okay, Michael, thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. We're going to switch over to Jim in New York. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Jim in New York, are you there?
Yes.
There you are.
Yes. Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Did you ever hear the journalist Greg Palast?
Oh, yeah.
Well, he had a great interview the March 7th on the Jimmy Dore show, talking about the Koch brothers.
Yes.
Now they want to take Venezuelan oil. Have you heard that?
Yeah, I did hear an excerpt from it, and I read a summary of it. And yeah, like I said, only last January, John Bolton was saying, yeah, we want to get our hands on that Venezuelan oil.
Yes. But initially, the Koch brothers wanted to bring heavy crude Canadian oil down through the Keystone Pipeline to Corpus Christi. But that has been stalled or for whatever reason. And another great place for heavy crude is Venezuela.
Yes.
So it's funny because, you know, the Koch brothers were hated by the left and some on the right. And it seems like they pretended they didn't like Trump, like plausible deniability. Pretend you don't like them. But then I was reading the Koch brothers, they're women merely players. It's like a big show. I think Trump's in bed with the Koch brothers, among others.
Yeah, I think that was established. They donated to his campaign.
No, because I remember they were anti-Trump initially. He was running. It seemed they didn't like Trump.
I stand corrected on that one.
That could just be theater for the public consumption. Yes.
Well, they may have some financial entanglements that precede the presidential campaign, and again, it's something that we would need to look into. We know that Trump got into trouble several times during his business career, and he got bailed out by different people. And obviously he's going to feel obligated to them. And this all took place before he ran for president.
Yes. Yes. But I just find it interesting. I think that, it's a clever tactic by the Koch brothers. Pretend you don't like them, but secretly you like them. They also backed Trump's tax cut.
Well, I can imagine anybody with, the money junkies all backed his tax cut. And they made out very well from it.
Yes. But, what we're doing in Venezuela is just awful.
Yes.
I think the gentleman from Tennessee called yesterday saying how Marco Rubio was all happy about the blackout. Poor mother was holding her child who died.
Yes.
Because of the lack of electricity in the hospital. And these people, Rubio, Pence, they're psychopaths. They don't care. It's all money. They'll as soon let 5 million people starve to death as long as their profits are coming in. They're psychopaths. It's a psychopathic trait.
Well, I think it would be more accurate to say they're sociopathic, but there's actually a very thin line between the two. And psychopaths lose control. Sociopaths have a lot of the same problems, but they're always in control. And we don't want to get into, dueling diagnoses here. I think suffice it to say, pretty much everybody understands what's going on is evil, and it's being done by evil people. Anyway, Jim, we're going to let you go. The phone lines are loading up here.
Mike.
I'm way behind on my talking points here. Dan in Illinois. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Hi, Mike. Before your show, I seen a video about how in Madrid, Spain, 10 people apparently stormed the North Korean embassy, took people hostages, and they stuck around until I guess one of them got loose, and then they ran out of there with a bunch of computers and stuff. Now, this happened 5 days before the summit.
Yes.
And they were talking, and you don't hear nothing about it. And they were saying, this was a Guardian article, so they were reading from the Guardian. And they were saying this is probably why Trump was making these comments about, we know more about your country than what you think we do.
Could very well be. We just put up an article at whatreallyhappened.com in which they've arrested some of the people who stormed that North Korean embassy, and 2 of them are identified as having connections to the Central Intelligence Agency.
Yeah, that's what they were saying. Because through the video that they had, surveillance videos they identified them. I'll let you go real quick. Bye.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And, well, that'll teach North Korea to use strong encryption. All righty. Now, Hawaii's own Tulsi Gabbard was on the Stephen Colbert show last night, and she was texting out messages to everybody to tune in, which I didn't do and probably should have, because it was an extremely hostile interview. And Colbert didn't even tell jokes. He just focused on trying to associate Tulsi with David Duke and the war crimes of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. So I used to like Stephen Colbert. I had a lot of respect for him, but he has been absorbed by the Borg, if you will. Okay, let's talk about that college admissions scandal. And this is really ballooning up. And the reason these 2 actresses were arrested, they weren't part of the bribery scheme. They were people who paid money to get their kids into these elite schools, which still means, they're cheating. And for students who are trying to get into these colleges, you need to understand that for every student who is admitted because of bribery or chicanery or family connections, that there's another student who had the academic qualifications who has been declined. And that's why this should be upsetting to so many people. And already there are attacks on Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin. Kellyanne Conway basically came out and said, I guess they were worried their daughters are as stupid as their mothers, because it was a dumb thing to do. It was a very arrogant thing to do here. And now they're looking at Felicity Huffman's husband, who's the Oscar-nominated actor William H. Macy. Now, he has not been charged in this, but their husband and wife, and Huffman and William Rick Singer, who's the college admissions advisor and mastermind of the scam, apparently they've got a call between them. So it may have been him rather than her that was paying for all of this thing. Now, interestingly enough, the FBI literally stumbled across this college fraud scheme by accident while working on an unrelated undercover operation. And apparently they were interviewing somebody for an unrelated case, and they just volunteered, do you know this is going on? So 50 parents and coaches have already been charged in connection with the plot that involved parents paying bribes of up to $6 million to get their children into these elite schools. And apparently one of the coaches involved was basically gave lessons to Michelle Obama and both of her daughters. So a lot of people are starting to look about, what's going there. And this gets us to Jared Kushner, because his school record wasn't very good. His high school administrators said he was less than a stellar student. And it appears that he got into Harvard primarily because his father, Charles Kushner, donated $2.5 million to Harvard University. So here we have a guy who really wasn't qualified to be in Harvard. He got into Harvard through a back door, through his father's money, and now he's one of the most powerful people in the United States government. And I understand, politics and corruption. We have people in government who really shouldn't be there. They're not qualified, but they're there anyway. But Kushner appears to be one of those. Down at the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has very little to do with poverty and almost nothing to do with the law, they're just piling in the donations, and their war chest, if you will, is solid gold. They now have a fund of nearly $500 million with which to go on out and attack Israel's enemies or anybody else who's a foe of liberalism here. Okay. Getting into the economic news here, as you know, there's a big brouhaha brewing between the United States of America and Germany, and not just over the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Now it's over Huawei. And the United States is saying, if you do business with them instead of an American company, we will stop sharing intelligence with you. And basically, Jude Woodward, author of The U.S. versus China, Asia's New Cold War, was saying the problem is the United States has literally run out of threats. In the past, the trading relationship and strength of the U.S. economy and the size of the U.S. market meant that the U.S. had huge clout and didn't have to make threats. Well, those days are gone. We're not making anything Germany really wants to buy. And the American people are tapped out. We can't buy what Germany is selling. Claire and I were noticing down at the bottom of the hill, we have this former drive-in movie theater, which used to be a flea market, and now it's an overflow lot for the island's car dealerships. And it is jam-packed full. People just don't have the money, and they don't want to borrow. They know a recession's coming on in. And they don't see the government doing anything about it other than to move to protect the banking industry. Getting on back to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the European Parliament is now calling to stop the pipeline project. And they're saying Russia and the EU will remain key economic partners in the future, but Nord Stream 2 reinforces EU dependency on Russian gas supplies, threatens the EU internal market, and is not aligned with EU energy policy. Well, I think the EU basically just knuckled under to the United States. Let's talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, or the One Belt, One Road Initiative here. And it's becoming a serious threat to the Western economy. And we have talked before about how this system is going to allow Asian products to get to Europe much faster and much less costly than traditional shipping. But that works two ways, because now European products, and especially agricultural produce, are going to be able to reach Asia in a very timely manner. And that means that Asia is probably going to be buying more of their agriculture from Europe than they are from the United States of America, especially after all the embarrassment over GMO. I mean, China's in the habit of rejecting cargo ships filled with American wheat and corn if it detects GMO in them. Now, the U.S. is still trying to put pressure on Italy to stay out of the China's new Silk Road, and they're saying it's a national security issue. No, it isn't. China is not going to invade Europe over the one road, one belt system. This is about money. Italy is a major global economy and a great investment destination. And they're trying to say that, you know, Italy signing onto the One Belt, One Road, it lends legitimacy to what is essentially China's vanity project. That's the new dismissal. It's not really going to work. China's just building it to make themselves look good. Well, China's spending their money on infrastructure where the U.S. is spending it on war. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the economic news. And there's an article over at Sputnik News which is confirming something we have all known for quite a while, which is the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics data is not hard science. It's largely political. In other words, they're saying what they think you want to hear. Now, even so, the Bureau of Labor Statistics said that the economy created 20,000 new jobs in February compared to the expected 180,000 jobs. So they're admitting there's a hiring slowdown. They tried to explain it away saying, well, employers can't find people to apply for the jobs here. We also know that some 76,000 jobs were lost in February, at least according to the numbers that we can get. We know that there are close to 100 million Americans who are long-term unemployed, have not had jobs for months, if not years. So you're being lied to. I just decided I'm going to try and get that matrix graphic, the little green letters on black for my computer screens, because that's where we are. We're in a modern matrix here. Turning on over to the immigration issue. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is basically trying to get a vote to block Trump's emergency declaration. I'm not even sure that's actually legal. The whole point of an emergency declaration is for the president to act in the face of a crisis. And now Congress basically wants to usurp that authority from him. Now, here's an interesting little story. This came out of Breitbart. The French National Assembly has approved the creation of a new Franco-German assembly that would see the two countries represented in a single parliament. Now, I'm going to take a guess here that France and Germany are looking forward to the dissolution of the EU as it is right now, and that they want to be the core of a new confederation. Although I think probably most of the European states are going to be happy to go back to being independent states. I seem to remember that France and Germany used to be enemies, at least during World War II. Trump is considering classifying drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, and I wonder if Congress is going to stand up and say, no, you can't do that either. Can't do that either. All right. Let's see. I'm going to skip that one till tomorrow. The U.S. Supreme Court has rejected an effort to require police to render emergency aid to individuals they injure in the course of an arrest. This was the case of Stevens, Rucker versus Friends, and they simply refused to hear the case. What happened was Ohio police shot a military veteran multiple times, and then despite having first aid training, they just let him bleed to death. And the Supreme Court let stand a lower court ruling that police satisfy their constitutional obligations to assist a person they injure in the course of an arrest simply by calling for an ambulance to transport the arrestee to the hospitals. Attorneys with the Rutherford Institute had asked the court to hear the case, arguing that if prisoners have a constitutional right to medical care under the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment, then police should be held to a comparable standard in their treatment of people that they arrest. I'm a little disappointed in the Supreme Court for that decision here. All right, let's talk about the Boeing 737 MAX 8. Great Britain has now joined the list of nations banning it from their airspace. They don't want it landing at their airports. They want it flying overhead. And we were talking about this before. Apparently last November, following the Lion Air crash, Boeing actually issued a warning that the angle of attack sensor was sometimes sending erroneous data, which would cause the autopilot to push the aircraft nose down. And in both of these crashes, what the pilots were telling the control tower was the plane kept trying to dive even as they were trying to climb. So apparently this was a known issue that Boeing apparently didn't do anything about. And even worse, pilots weren't told about the new automatic systems that have been put in. I guess the attitude was if they're trained to fly the 737, they're okay to fly the 737 MAX. Meanwhile, the airlines are now charging travelers who want to switch from Boeing 737 MAX flights to different hardware. And travelers are understandably nervous after the two crashes having so many similarities to them. But here in the United States, we got to take a break. Be right back after these words from our sponsors. Came to an end because Donald Trump has done something which actually, for once, shows some real leadership. He has issued an executive order to ground the Boeing 737 MAX 8 planes. In fact, I think he also included the MAX 9s as well. He said they're grounded effective immediately. And actually, the United States was the only nation still flying that aircraft after Canada announced they were grounding it. So there is an issue. And to me, it looks like it's probably going to be just a software patch to fix it. But if they knew there was this issue with erroneous data coming from the stall warning, why didn't they fix it back in November? Okay, let's take a phone call from Joe in Tennessee. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I was watching a thing on, just happened to see 60 Minutes, or maybe it was Fox. I'm sorry, it was Fox. And they just had a list of the Democratic candidates, and Tulsi Gabbard's already being Ron Paul'd.
Yes.
I mean, her name's not up on the list. And I don't know enough about her, and I think maybe you do, but because she's from Hawaii and all that.
Yes.
But she really should take a lesson from Ron Paul and not be Mr. Nice Guy as they cut you out of debates, as they don't put your name up in polls. She's really going to have to take a page from Donald Trump and raise hell, because the military-industrial complex and the deep state that controls our media, they're going to do exactly what they did to Ron Paul to her, unless she does what Donald Trump did, which is become noisy, become abrasive, combative. You can't be a nice guy. I mean, I love Ron Paul, and on a political scale, I agree with him a lot more than I do with Donald Trump. But you need to be combative to get your message out through this controlled medium that we have. And I don't know, it seems to me like she's smart and she's nice, but I just from my observations of her, I think she's going to get steamrolled over like Ron Paul because she's too nice.
Well, there's definitely a lot of forces arrayed against her, mostly because of her anti-war stance. She's a threat to the military-industrial complex, and right now the military-industrial complex is riding high on the hog, so to speak. So, yeah, she's got an uphill battle. Now, I don't agree with everything that she stands for. She's definitely opposed to the Second Amendment. She's unfortunately fully on board with human-caused global warming. But I do like her, and not just because she's from right here in Hawaii. That certainly didn't help my opinion of Barack Obama, if you will recall. But she does have an uphill fight. And, I mean, just looking at the way Stephen Colbert just went after her last night is a good indicator. The corporate media has already decided Tulsi must go.
Well, and once again, I mean, when she has a platform and they try to say, you know, you're Assad's best friend and things like that, she's got to be aggressive and say, well, Obama was supporting ISIS. Obama, you know, and I mean, throw it right back in their face, because when you look at Assad isn't really a homicidal maniac like these ISIS head choppers that we were supporting, people that burn pilots up in cages.
Yeah.
That's what CIA, that's what the deep state, that's what the friends of Colbert were supporting and funding. And like I said, the reason why they're not showing her name and they're Ron Pauling her is because they are afraid of her. And if she has a combative attitude and she projects her message, the message is very popular, and the truth is on her side about who Assad really is and who Obama was funding and who the deep state has funded. You know, from Libya when they killed Gaddafi. You know, you can't just let guys like Stephen Colbert run the narrative. You have to get your narrative out there, and our narrative, which is I agree with her narrative on war, is we have the facts on our side. And we can't be, you know, you can't really be nice when they're being abusive towards you and trying to like give you a lie to respond to. It's almost like, you know, how often do you beat your wife? I mean, the way they phrase their arguments. So she's really got to be aggressive and go after their narrative, or she shouldn't even bother getting in. I mean, because they're going to run right over her.
All right. Well, you know, Tulsi has a Twitter feed, and you know, you might post that comment. I don't know if she or one of her aides is reading that. I do not have any contact with the Tulsi campaign. Okay, I'm not even sure exactly how it is that I got on her broadcast list for SMS messages. Obviously, somebody out there knows that I'm a supporter for her. But you know, there's another dimension to this we might consider, and this goes back to Hillary Clinton. Because if she is considering coming on in, okay, she and her cronies are going to want to get rid of any other female potential Democratic nominees so that Hillary can go back to campaigning on I'm a woman and it's a woman's turn. Because if Hillary comes on in and it's going to be time for a woman, I mean, let's face it, you know, Tulsi's got the looks and the youth that Hillary does not.
No, she's a very good-looking woman.
Yes, she
amazing.
is.
I mean, she's stunning.
Well, this is Hawaii. Good-looking women grow
Hillary,
on trees out here.
Yeah, they do. I've been there a lot, and I like Hawaii, except I had a lot of trouble with Hawaiians. They seem to want to fight me all the time. You know, I'm a haole, and I'm places where I shouldn't be. Yeah, I was out. I worked on the Hawaiian cruise ships with NCL.
Yeah, those can be tense environments here. But what Claire and I have discovered living here in Hawaii, the Native Hawaiians are the long-term, multi-generational families here. They're kind of like a mirror. What you project onto them, you're going to get back. And it's always worked out very well for us. I've seen a lot of the U.S. military who come on out here, and they sort of strut around like they're an occupying army, which actually they are. And they do get some hostility. Unfortunately, lately, under the press of the economic decline and everything, there's not as much aloha here as there was when Claire and I first moved here. When we first moved here, you know, the people were absolutely wonderful, and most of them still are. But again, under the economic pressure, you know, crime is going up. There's a lot of road rage out there. I used to enjoy driving around this island, and not anymore. It's just this chore.
Well, I just couldn't understand because I'm in my 50s, and I'd have like young Hawaiian guys, like 20-something years old, wanting to fight me in a bar, and I'd be like, just go in off work and wanting to have a beer. I just kind of was like, what's with these guys? I just came in here to have a beer. I don't feel like rolling around on a bar floor with a guy half my age, But anyway, I don't know. Maybe, like you said, it might be the way I walk or something. I got a New York accent, so maybe I don't know. I got to the point where, I'd go back to the boat and I'd be they'd have like TSA there and they'd be busting my chops. And I was just like, this isn't good for, tourism.
No, TSA has been a curse on our tourism industry. And that's why we call it the Tourism Suppression Agency out here.
Right. And I wanted to ask you about that Boeing jet. I think that Trump hit on it the other day. He says it might be just too much automation. And I think that could be, when you hear that planes are crashing and then they say, well, it might need like a software adjustment, I'm thinking, flight is kind of simple. You got two engines, thrust, right?
Yeah.
You got the, and if it is caused, if these two plane crashes have been caused because of, overly automating these jets, it's really disgraceful. And I hope
the automation is primarily to try and, first of all, comply with international flight rules, make sure that you're seen on radars and everything. But a lot of the automation has to do with keeping the flights economic. And the reason that Boeing company made the 737 MAX was in order to put on these new, more efficient engines, and then it was kind of a compromise. They had to move the engines around. They had to have a longer nose gear so that the engines would clear the ground. But it's looking more and more like there was a known issue with the stall warning indicator, and it was hooked into the flight computer. And when it thought the plane was going to stall, it would automatically nose the aircraft down, which is what even a human pilot would do if you're on the edge of a stall. But apparently where the real failure came from, next in the cascade, if you will, is that Boeing apparently didn't really get this out to the pilots. It wasn't included in their training. They just sort of assumed if you're type certified for the 737, you shouldn't have a problem with the 737 MAX. And boy, did we learn that was not correct the hard way. I think it'll be fixed very quickly, but I think the damage to Boeing in terms of its reputation is going to be a long time going. And yes, you're going to have Airbus is going to be leaping in to try and steal away a lot of business. This was a bad time for this to happen. Now, civilian passenger jets like the 737, it's only, I think, about maybe 6% of Boeing's revenue versus their other civilian commercial jets, not to mention its warplanes.
Well, that's kind of scary. Because they were both times it was while they were taking off, right?
Yeah.
So they're taking off and they got a false reading, and it nosed it down. That's pretty scary. You'd think that during a takeoff that the pilot would be totally in charge of that airplane.
Well, the pilot really should be totally in
to
charge. That's the issue, that the computer shouldn't have taken control of the plane away from him at that point. Now, I did get an email from somebody who is a pilot who said that there actually is a way to override that behavior, but apparently flight crews are not being taught about it.
Yeah, that's I work on ships in the engine room, and I hate it when they when they over automate something and you don't have an easy way to take it manual.
Yeah.
It's a real nightmare, and next thing you know, you're black. You're in the dark, and that's a horrible feeling. And it's always on the I go back to the old days when everything was hand valves and everything was manual, and I'd take that. The automation, it saves work, but in a way it doesn't, because it's very difficult to repair. This is, it's kind kind of sad
Well,
to lose
I think
people
that
like that.
companies go for the automation, again, because they think it's going to make their airplanes or ships more fuel efficient and save them money, and also means that they don't have to spend money to hire more skilled crew. That they can just get, just somebody off the dock and pay them, a minimum salary and get them in that engine room. But I'm in agreement with you. I'm an old-fashioned kind of guy. I like to see the machinery and have my hands on it. When I was working as an entertainer on the Mississippi Queen, when I was off duty, one of the things I'd love to do was go down to the engine room and just watch those steam engines. And they were just graceful and elegant, and it was one of my favorite places on the ship, boat, steamboat.
Yeah, I have an unlimited steam license, unlimited horsepower. I worked my first. I stayed with steam until they all went motor because it was just so much fun. I loved it. But after a while, they turned them all into razor blades. But it was great, and the guys I sail with, the old World War II guys, and even submarine guys that worked on German submarines we had. It was just amazing era, but it's over now.
It really was, and unfortunately, the Mississippi Queen is also razor blades now, which reminds me of how old I am.
Well, they got the Natchez. The one down there now is the Natchez. They still have a steamboat.
The company is still going good, but there is a shelf life to these steamboats, and we used to pull into Natchez, and I had a lot of fun there, which I need not go into.
They make a great Bloody Mary on that.
Anyway,
Bloody
Joe,
Mary's great if you ever go on there.
Anyway, Joe, gotta let
Mike.
you go. We've had enough of a trip down Michael's memory lane here. And let's see. Thank you for the call. We're going to let you go. Okay, Facebook is having major problems. They're having outages across U.S. and Europe. And apparently it's so bad that Facebook itself has had to go onto Twitter to try and explain to everybody what's going on. But there's something going there. The good news is Facebook has now reversed their ban on zero hedge, and they're saying, well, we made a mistake. It was all an innocent error, and zero hedge is now back here. Okay, getting on back to Captain Marvel's story. This is out of InfoWars here. Apparently, YouTube has changed their search algorithm to suppress criticism of Brie Larson and Captain Marvel. And apparently the problem is people, now they've seen the movie, they're absolutely rejecting it. And they're going on social media saying, this is a terrible, terrible movie. It's all pushing, liberal propaganda. It's great visual effects. The kids are going to like it. But we've seen this on Rotten Tomatoes. They're deleting the negative reviews. Now apparently YouTube is doing exactly the same thing, because after all, we need you to buy those movie tickets here and make these these rich Hollywood people richer than they already are, because then they'll donate more money to liberal causes. Over in Iran, there has been a new development which is going to speed up quantum computing. Researchers have created a new device that allows them to probe the interference of quasi-particles, potentially paving the way for the development of topological qubits. So this is real cutting-edge stuff, and apparently this work was being done by Michael Manfra and the Bill and Dee O'Brien Chair Professor of Physics and Astronomy at Purdue University. I saw Iran in there. That may have been a mistake. And they've been trying to do this for a while, and they finally succeeded. And the devices they've come up with are so small, they literally confine electrons to 2 dimensions. Like a marble rolling around on a tabletop, they don't move up or down. That is a tiny space. We got to take a break for commercials. Last segment of our program coming up after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Last segment of our program today here. And let's see, we are basically at the middle of March. which is supposed to come in like a lion and go out like a lamb, but we're not seeing much of the lamb yet. Across much of the country, this is the time of year when spring sports begin. And unfortunately, for a great deal of the country, those sports fields, courts, are still covered with snow. Up in Minnesota, the baseball, softball, lacrosse fields, they're all basically still covered with snow. And another article, this one from comonews.com, saying that snow again, winter is determined not to go down without a fight, which, by the way, is exactly the forecast that we had in the original Farmer's Almanac last autumn. So they're saying surprise snow fell across parts of the far North Sound and the Cascade foothills early Tuesday as the lingering effects of a cold front that swept through overnight brought a Puget Sound convergence zone and knocked snow levels down to a few hundred feet again. We have yet another winter storm coming into the center of the United States. It's Winter Storm Ulmer. They're almost out of letters. They're predicting major plains, blizzard, heavy snow, high winds. In fact, they're saying it's turning into what they're calling a bomb cyclone. And basically, it's happening right now, unleashing a wide array of life-threatening weather hazards for tens of millions of Americans. The impact area is going to be North Texas through the Dakotas, and Minnesota is expected to be hit the hardest. The storm will likely qualify as a meteorological bomb, short for bombogenesis, which describes storms whose central pressure drops 24 millibars in 24 hours. The lower the pressure and the quicker it drops, the more powerful the storm. And they're saying this could be one for the record books. All righty. Cheyenne-based meteorologist Don Day Jr. says an approaching major winter storm could pose serious dangers to winter travelers as well as to livestock on farms and ranches in eastern Wyoming. In fact, I was taking a look at the highway report for Wyoming. It's pretty much shut down. There are closures all over the place due to the weather. And yeah, this is going to be a problem for farmers. This is when the new livestock is coming into being. We could see food shortages coming out of this hard winter here. One of the South Dakota newspapers had a headline, "Take this one seriously." Right now, all the roads in the Nebraska Panhandle are closed by the storm. Let's see. Over in Britain, it's snowing heavily on Dartmoor, Devon, and they're saying below freezing temperatures on the highest parts of the moors. I already talked about Wyoming closures. So it's, yeah, we're going into a cooling phase. And I think all of those carbon Nazis had better stop trying to push human-caused global warming or climate change or climate disruption and screaming about carbon taxes, and actually start thinking about how we're going to get through the next several years with these long, hard winters. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of wonderful things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Keep us on the air in these very, very tough times. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. And have a good evening. We'll be back tomorrow.